Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're doing well. If you're new here, my name is Valentina and I'm a first-time author working on my debut novel, a sci-fi/fantasy with some romance and dystopian vibes called Project Gaia. And today I am participating in Preptober, which happens in the month of October, and it's basically a preparation for National Novel Writing Month where me and many other writers will attempt to write the first 50,000 words of our novel. And so we really have to prepare because otherwise it's not gonna go well. And I want to make sure that come November 1st, I am ready to hit the ground running. And so that's why today we're gonna be brainstorming the key details of my novel and two of my main protagonists. Because honestly, I feel like those are some of the most important things that are really helpful to iron out before you start writing. We're gonna be doing this together in real time, and I'm gonna be explaining my thought process as I go step by step so that you can brainstorm right alongside me. This should be a really fun video, so I hope you're as excited as I am. In terms of brainstorming tools, I'm gonna be trying out a platform called Skrinntel, and importantly, I am not sponsored by them, so I'll be telling you my honest opinion about them. If you don't want to use a paid app, I completely understand. In that case, I would recommend a platform called Milanote because I believe it's free to use and it offers similar functionalities to Skrinntel. If you're asking yourself why I'm not using Milanote, that's a great question. I tried using it and didn't fully love it, so that's why I wanted to try something new. Granted, I also didn't spend that much time trying to figure it out, so if you want me to give it a second chance, I'm definitely open to that. But that said, for the purposes of this video, I'm gonna leave both tools in the description down below so that you can give them both a try and see what you think. Okay, I've yapped enough about tools. Let's get to brainstorming. Dun dun dun. So this is gonna be really fun. I am opening up my computer and let's get started. So I'm opening up Skrinntel. The first thing I want to do is create something called a board. Okay, so I'm gonna go into Skrinntel and I'm gonna go to create a new board, and then we're gonna just add a little board right here. Nice. And then I'm gonna call this key details. And that is where we're going to be brainstorming the key details of the novel. My goal for this page is for it to be a grounding force that keeps my story focused and prevents it from going off on tangents. Because realistically, even though I'm going to be doing some plotting in the next video, there's still going to be a little bit of pantsing involved, I think, unfortunately, because I just don't think I have enough time to figure out the entire plot before I start writing. So my hope for this page is that it acts as my compass so that even if I stray slightly off path, I'll still hopefully be going in the right direction. So the first category that we're going to be thinking about is genre. That's the overarching literary category that informs your story's world and expectations. For my book, it's science/fantasy because this novel combines both advanced technology and a little bit of magic. Okay, so next we're going to be thinking about POV, which is all about the lens that the story is experienced in. And for that one, I might change this, but for now, I'm thinking I'll write the story in something called third person limited. And what that means is that the narration stays close to one person at a time, but rotates among different perspectives. The reason that I'm choosing this POV is that I think it lends itself really well to the particular story that I want to write, because I want to get into the head of a lot of different characters. I noticed that a lot of my favorite books use this perspective, like for example, Blood Over Brighthaven or Pillars of the Earth. And I think what I like about it is that it allows you to understand a lot of different characters deeply and really get to see their motivations and their inner worlds. And I also think this particular POV lends itself really well to the type of story that I want to write, because I'm gonna try to write about at least 5 main characters, and there's also gonna be a couple of secondary characters as well. I just feel like it's what my story needs. I'm not gonna lie, I am a little bit nervous about trying to write so many different POVs, and I definitely do not recommend you do this if you're a first-time author, because all of the advice I've read has suggested to start with 1, maximum 2 POVs. I think at the end of the day, because I do strongly believe that this is what my story needs, I'm gonna at least try to do it. And you know, worst case scenario, I can always change my mind afterwards and reduce the amount of POVs or try something different if I really find that I'm not capable of doing it. But I want to give it a try. Okay, so the next is going to be word count, and this is something that I honestly had to look up because I had no idea how to think about this. I'll actually link the article that I found down below so that you can read it too, which talks through how to think about word count a little bit better. And what I would recommend doing if you're not sure is to try to find a couple of books that are a little bit similar to yours, especially in terms of genre and number of POVs, and that might give you a better idea of what to aim for. For myself, I think my target amount of words will be 120,000 to 160,000 words, which from my understanding is a little bit on the higher end of sci-fi, but I feel like that's what it'll probably take to do justice to all the different POVs that I'm going to have in the book. And the reason that's the ballpark that I'm aiming for is that I noticed that sci-fi books tend to be about 100,000 to 125,000 words, but the ones that have multiple POVs are typically longer. So I wanted to aim for something that's a little bit above that 120,000 word count, but hopefully still manageable. The other thing I will say is that word count is most important if you're traditionally publishing, and that's one of the many reasons that I'm actually excited to not do that and to self-publish, because I want to have the freedom to use as many words as needed to tell the best story that I can. Okay, so now let's go to the next section, which is themes. And those are really the underlying ideas that your story explores beneath the plot surface. In this case, the themes I want to cover are human identity versus technology, sustainability in the face of progress, propaganda versus the truth, the importance of democracy, and immigration, which I know is a boatload of themes that are also pretty heavy, but I'm excited. And you might ask yourself, how should you think about themes? How do you pick them? My advice would be to choose themes that you're really passionate about and or that you have a lot of knowledge of, so that you feel really comfortable talking about them and that you really want to talk about them. Because at least for me, the desire to dig into these themes is actually one of the main reasons that I want to write the book in the first place. For example, I want to write about tech because I work in tech. So I spend a lot of time thinking about technology and its impact on society. And I want to write about immigration because I am an immigrant. So I have a lot of thoughts about what it means to be an immigrant, why people even leave their country to begin with, and what that feels like, what it feels like to be in a country that is not the country you were born in. All these things are things that I'm looking forward to thinking about and writing about. This is how I came up with the themes for my novel, but I'd love to hear about yours if you want to share in the comments. Now, moving on to the next section, the anchor. This isn't something that you necessarily have to have, but I think it would be particularly helpful, especially if you're pantsing. So if you are, take notes. This is the main symbolic or tangible element that all of your story is centered around. So for example, in Pillars of the Earth, the anchor is the cathedral. You have some characters that are really wanting to build the cathedral, and you have other characters that are equally determined to stop them and make sure that it never gets built. And so the cathedral becomes the sun that all the characters orbit around. For my story, I think it's going to be something called The Source, which is very much a working name because I'm truly terrible at naming things. But the point is that the source is something that the characters are willing to die for and kill for, and that is really going to drive a lot of the conflict in the story. Okay, so now we get to a really fun one, which is the central question that the story is centered around. And for my book, that question is progress at any cost truly progress? You can also have a secondary question, which in my novel is embodied by a couple of the characters and which further deepens the emotional stakes. And for my novel, that question is, what does it mean to be human when machines have eclipsed us? We'll see. Okay. We're almost done. The last thing that I have here is a one-sentence summary. This is actually an idea I got from a YouTuber named Anna. I really hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. She is awesome. Definitely go check her out. The idea is to summarize your entire story in just one sentence. And at least for me, knowing what the core of the story is super helpful because, again, it's one of those things that will keep me focused, which is super important. I'm not gonna tell you mine because I don't want there to be too many spoilers, but I'm gonna give you an example just to inspire you. This one is from the book Blood Over Brighthaven, and it goes like this. A brilliant young mage uncovers a horrific secret at the heart of her shining city's magic, forcing her to choose between exposing the truth and destroying everything she's ever known. I feel like you can already tell that this is going to be a great book just from that one sentence. And that's what I love about the one sentence summary. If you're excited about your summary, that already tells you that you're going in the right direction. And now we're moving on to my favorite part of the video, which is brainstorming characters. Creating characters is one of the things I most enjoy doing because I love thinking about what motivates people, what holds them back, and what propels them forward. I also believe that writing characters who feel real is one of the things that makes your story stick with readers forever. If I read a novel and miss the characters when I'm done, that often means that I loved what I read and would want to read more about those characters. So these are the type of characters that we're gonna try to create today, and we're gonna focus on two of our main protagonists. So for this, we're gonna go back into Scrintl and let's create a second board which we'll call characters, and it's gonna be nested within our novel's primary board. Now that we have our character board, what I like to do is to create a dossier for each character, focusing on specific elements that I hope will help me create characters that are dynamic, relatable, and believable. I'm a very visual person, so I like to find pictures for all of my characters. So let's go ahead and take a look at Pinterest and see what we can find. Okay, I tried to use Pinterest, but got annoyed by the rampant use of AI. So instead, I ended up using famous people as placeholders. Hopefully they won't mind. This is really just a placeholder. And what I actually want to do eventually is to hire an artist to design the characters and really make them exactly as I picture them in my head. So that part should be really fun. But for now, this will be a really fun visual to have. And I'm also somebody who does believe in manifesting just a little bit. So the way I'm thinking about it right now is that if by some sort of miracle, one day the novel becomes wildly popular and then they decide to make a movie adaptation, then this would be my dream cast for that movie. I don't know how realistic it is, but it's good to dream big, right? So what I'm gonna do now is go back into Scrintl and really start building out these characters. Let's start with Gaia, our main protagonist, and as I fill out all the details, I'll also talk them through with you. Okay, so the first thing is going to be age. I feel like it can be really valuable to have a rough idea of how old your character is because that also tells you how mature they are. In Gaia's case, I thought it would be really interesting if she was fairly established in her life because then the inciting incident will be more disruptive for her, and I thought that would be really fascinating to read about. So I decided that she would be about 28 years old. Then we move on to defining elements. These are the core traits that make a character instantly recognizable so that when you read about them, you can immediately tell that, hey, this is so-and-so. You know, for example, if we think about one of my favorite books, Pillars of the Earth, one of the main characters, Ellen, has golden eyes. And you know that whenever Ken Follett is talking about a character with striking golden eyes, he's talking about Ellen. In Gaia's case, her defining feature is really her thick brown wavy hair that she often wears in a messy braid. Okay, so now let's talk about role. This is a category I borrowed from Anna New, another awesome author tuber that you should definitely check out, who also makes brainstorming videos, so I'll be sure to leave her channel down below. A character's role is really their function or position in their world. And in Gaia's case, she is actually a scientist, and she is also a human, which is not true for every character. And now we're moving on to drive and motivation. These are two categories that I got from the author Brandon Sanderson, who generously posts his writing lectures for free on YouTube. Definitely go check them out because they're so good. I'm gonna leave them also in the description down below. But anyways, let's talk a little bit about what these two categories are and why you should definitely consider including them in your characters' dossiers. Drive is what moves your characters to action. And in Gaia's case, her drive is really to protect. Motivation is the deeper emotional or moral reason behind the drive. And for Gaia, it's that she can't stand injustice and exploitation and doesn't want to see anyone get hurt. Drive and motivation are going to be critical elements for your characters because that's what's going to allow you to create characters who are proactive, have agency, and drive the story forward, rather than characters who are passive and simply reacting to what happens to them in the plot, which is a lot more boring. Defining your character's drive and motivation is particularly important if you are a pantser, because you can sometimes create really interesting plots by simply creating characters who have very contrasting agendas and conflicting drives and motivations, and then putting them all together and seeing what happens. Like I said before, I don't know that I would necessarily recommend pantsing, but if you are going to do it, then defining each of your character's drive and motivation is really gonna help. And now we're gonna talk about a character's triggers. Triggers are what gets under your character's skin and gets them to react, often unwisely. This probably ages me quite a bit, but do you remember the movie Back to the Future? Well, in that movie, one of the main protagonists had this trigger, which was being called a coward. And whenever he would be called a coward, he would absolutely lose it, and there would be consequences, sometimes dire. So yeah, that was a very well-developed trigger that had a major impact on both the characters and the story. In Gaia's case, I don't yet know what her triggers are, or even if she has any. And something that I want to highlight is that you don't have to fill all these categories for every single character, and you also don't have to fill them in right away. You can absolutely keep filling this dossier as you write and as you discover who your characters really are, which is honestly something that I love to do, because to me, getting to know these characters is really like getting to know a real person. And as I write, I discover more and more elements of their personality, which honestly makes it really fun for me as well as a writer. Now let's talk about the next category, which is character's strengths, a character's unique abilities or skills. For Gaia, there are some that I'm not going to mention because I really want to avoid spoilers, but I will spill some of the beans. Some of her strengths are that she is exceptionally smart, curious, creative, and hopeful. And I really hope that all of these strengths impact the plot in some interesting ways. Now we're moving on to one of my favorite categories, which is a character's flaws. And that is a character's weaknesses, blind spots, and limitations. And for Gaia, one of her core flaws is that she is not particularly strong or sturdy. And this is something that we're gonna see her have to work around throughout the book. And now on to the next category, which is quirks. These are unique habits or traits that give the character individuality and texture. This is another category that I expect to discover as I write, but something I already know about Gaia is that she has ADHD, which stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. The reason I decided to write a character who has ADHD is that I have ADHD, and I thought it would be really interesting to write a protagonist with a neurodiversity, especially because I don't feel like I see ADHD being represented that much in media, and especially not in novels. And this actually leads me to talk about how I even come up with characters in the first place. Usually characters sort of come to me and I immediately know something about them, usually something that's at the core of who they are. Like for example, what drives them or what they're passionate about. And then from there, I just keep building more and more and more layers to the character so that they're a bit like an onion and they have multiple layers to them. And from that, I borrow characteristics from things I've read in the media or people that I actually know. Obviously, if you're borrowing from real people, please don't just take somebody's entire personality. That would get you into trouble. What I like to do is to just take one element of somebody's personality so that the person I end up creating is fully unrecognizable and completely distinct from the person that I borrowed that one element from. And I also like to look at personality tests like Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram, because those give you an idea of what personalities actually exist in the real world, and I find those to also be helpful references. Now let's talk about misbeliefs. This category comes from a book called Story Genius, and it's the core lie that a character believes about themselves, the world, or others, often rooted in a past wound. Misbeliefs drive conflict, put the character in gnarly situations, and also need to be overcome as part of your character's arc. I really appreciate misbeliefs because they enable you to create a character who changes throughout the story, which makes for a very satisfying read. For Gaia, her misbelief is that she thinks that logic and truth alone will persuade people. And boy, is she in for a rude awakening. Okay, so we're almost getting to the end. The next category is internal conflict. This is also something that makes your story so much more satisfying to read. And what it is basically what the character wrestles with throughout your story. For Gaia, it's going to be progress over preservation, because she's a scientist. So she's really gonna have to grapple with, is progress always a good thing? And I don't know if you noticed, but she actually embodies the central question in my novel, which is a way that you can make your themes come to life by really putting them inside your characters and making your characters live them. Another internal conflict that you'll see her grapple with is how much of herself is she willing to sacrifice to make the world a better place? Let's just say I do not envy her, because she's gonna go through a lot in this book. And then there's the external conflict, which I'm not gonna fill out here because I really don't want there to be any spoilers. These are the obstacles and struggles created by the external plot. This could be something that happens to the characters that they have to react to, or an enemy. Personally, I believe that it's good to have both external and internal conflicts to keep the readers at the edge of their seat. And then finally, there's a character's arc, which is the change that they go through throughout the story. I'm not gonna spoil any of my characters' arcs because I feel like that's one of the best parts to read about. But what I will say is that creating characters who grow and change throughout the story is one of the most satisfying things to read in a story. So I would highly encourage you to think about it for all of your characters if you can, or at the very least for the main characters. Okay, now we'll quickly talk through Tristan, one of the other main protagonists. I can't wait for you to meet him. So first off, I wanted Tristan to be a little bit younger than Gaia, and so I think he's going to be 25. In terms of defining elements, he is a cyborg, and he might actually be one of the only cyborgs in the story, which I think is going to make him extra interesting. He is handsome, but not in a traditional sense, which means that he's not this buff, muscular, 6 feet tall guy, but I hope he'll still grow on people, because I want to stay away from tropes as much as possible, and I want to write characters that are a little bit different from the ones that you typically read about. His role is also interesting. He is transhuman, which makes sense since he's a cyborg, but basically what that means is that he transcends humanity and is an enhanced version of a human being. His drive, especially at the beginning of the book, is really self-preservation, although things will change a little bit with him as the story unfolds. And his motivation, particularly at the beginning, is really going to be a sense of loyalty and duty. Although something he will discover is that he wants to be seen as more than just a weapon. He has a lot of strengths, and I'm not going to tell you all of them, but one of the things that I'm excited about is that he can alter his own body with the click of a button. And you will see what I mean when you're reading the book. And that's really all I'm going to say about his strengths, because I feel like he'll be one of the more interesting characters to get to know throughout the book. In terms of flaws, for him, it's really a lack of confidence. And then he has several misbeliefs, namely, I don't belong anywhere, caring only makes you weak, and no one would ever choose me if they saw the real me. This gets so deep. But yeah, that's what he'll be grappling with. He could really use a therapist. And next we'll talk about triggers. I already know what his triggers are going to be, but I don't want to spoil it too much, so you'll have to find out. But I will tell you about his internal conflict. And the things he'll grapple with are going to be self-reliance over connection, and contempt versus vulnerability. And that's really all I'm gonna share about Tristan right now. But I think the broader point that I'm trying to make with both him and Gaia is that when you think about writing characters, it's really helpful to make them internally consistent, but you also want to have a little bit of inconsistency within them. And that inconsistency becomes the spark that drives the story. What I mean by that is you'll have a character like Tristan who seems very consistent, he's self-reliant, he's a lone wolf, he's somebody who does what he's told and has a sense of duty, but he wouldn't really lift a finger for anyone else. So he seems fairly consistent, his character makes sense, he might remind you of people that you actually know in real life, and you feel like you know what to expect. But then, underneath all of those layers, there is that little bit of inconsistency, which is the fact that he craves connection, and he wants to be more than just somebody who follows orders. And that's where his character arc begins, where he becomes a little bit unpredictable, and really where the story gets juicy. So yeah, I encourage you to play with these concepts as you create your characters, and I hope it helps you develop more well-rounded and interesting characters. Woohoo! We did it! We brainstormed all the key elements of my novel and 2 of our main protagonists. And now we're so much closer to being ready to write our first draft. I really hope that this video was helpful and that it inspires you as you write your novels and characters. If you're also participating in National Novel Writing Month, best of luck! And if you made it all the way to the end, leave a brain emoji so that I know we're all hard at work brainstorming our novel. Get it? Sorry. That was a lame pun. I'd also love to know a bit more about the novels you're writing or your protagonists, so if you feel inspired to share, please do so in the comments. I can't wait to hear what you're all working on, and I'm so glad that we're doing this together. And if you want to see more of Project Gaia, then definitely subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a video. Thanks so much for watching, buona scrittura e a prestissimo, ciao!